Welcome to the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. If you're ready to listen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Thursday, September 29th, 2022. Welcome to episode 20 of the Alberta Prosperity Project Podcast. I'm your host, Hunter, today, joined today with Tanner, who is in a different location, it looks like, or at least somewhere in the jungle.
Well, that's a good way of putting it. I am in not so much a different location, but kind of. I have just finished, or just about finished, we're like this close to finishing construction on a new studio for podcasts just like this. This is, I've painted the walls, as you can tell. We did the back with vertical slats. We have some greenery. I won't give a whole tour just yet, but soon there'll be a better picture of what the studio looks like. I have one piece of artwork that I'm still waiting for to arrive, to place behind me here, hence the angled camera view is maybe what I'd call it. And again, I'm no audio technician and I'm no video technician, but it seemed like this is the nicest. On my left, you can't see it completely, but I have a couple of shelves with some books. I have an actual bookshelf over here, and I have a chair in the back. It's fun. It's been a fun project. It's I wanted to make this space as warm as possible, while also staying modern, kind of that caramel brown color I love. We have some shiplapping in here, and when the full tour comes out, I'm excited to show everyone. Now, behind you, I think that might be the cleanest I've ever seen your room. Now that your wife has so eloquently decorated it and keeps things much cleaner. Yeah. I know, because I've been to your place. You and Herb has been pretty kind to me, and I've been able to sleep over and stuff. And it's your house, your condo is cleaner than it's ever been before. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's usually I'm the one that does most of the cleaning for the listeners that don't know.
That's not true.
Just me
That's not true.
Being nice and being kind. But no, you have to do. I don't exactly have. I do have similar plants. We don't have one that tall quite yet. But besides that, everything else seems to be just as clean as it used to be. So I'm definitely just fine with it there. But big announcement, obviously. We talked about it a little bit last podcast. The rumors that were the fact that ArriveCAN and the restrictions were likely to be dropped, and as of the time of this recording, October 1st, ArriveCAN will be over. The mask mandate for air travel will be gone. I just saw just a few minutes ago here, Air Canada made a tweet saying they fully welcome it and that the mask mandate was not based on science, so that's definitely the big buzz right now on Twitter. But definitely there's obviously, as I'm sure the listeners know, the heavily debated app that is ArriveCAN. There was, often debates on security, there was debates on if it was necessary, there was debates on what it actually meant for Canadians and for travel and the tourism industry. So I guess just, a simple question today that we're going to be going over on the podcast, and that is, does the APP support the move of the federal government to get rid of ArriveCAN? Right.
Well, first, maybe we should discuss exactly what ArriveCAN is, because I know we have some American listeners and some listeners from Spain and some listeners from where else. It's so cool to see exactly the demographic, and where the listeners come from.
Yeah, we've got some British listeners as well over in the United Kingdom, so thank you for that. And as well, I mean, all over Europe. Germany has a little bit. I mean, there might be a language barrier. I'm not too sure. So maybe they, I don't know. Maybe they were Canadians that are now expats to Germany. I'm not too sure, but regardless, I'm happy that you're listening. I don't know. Maybe the podcast player auto translates it for us. So
that's
that might
cool.
be some as well.
So for all of our foreign friends and listeners, hello. If they're listening, ArriveCAN is an app, or wasn't. It is an app because it still exists, that was implemented by the federal government, that basically forced you as an individual to provide mandatory travel and public health info to the government. So it was for travelers who traveled, just those who traveled into foreign nations, right, Hunter? Not domestically.
Yeah, it was coming back in from a foreign country. So,
right, okay. So if you're returning from a foreign country, you had to, as a Canadian citizen, download this app, and this app transmitted your personal and mandatory travel, health, public, etc. information to the government, right? That's what its purpose was, right? And that includes, like border restrictions, right? Vaccinations and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. It was the argument was to simplify everything, so it also included your customs declaration. So obviously, those that haven't traveled internationally, you have to declare any goods that you purchased, or if you purchased prohibited items such as alcohol or tobacco products, anything like that. It was also on the app. So they were saying it was for a seamless process. Basically, was the idea of it.
Okay, so you had all this stuff on the app, and it's been implemented for what, about a year-ish?
Yep. Yeah. It was in October of 2021.
Okay, so about a year-ish, kind of in that. It's been here for a while.
Yeah.
And just recently, the federal government announced that it's now making ArriveCAN optional, right? Yeah. Now, what's our opinion on it? So, firstly, that app should have never been imposed or implemented to begin with, right? That, to me, seems to be self-evident. And the reason is quite clear, right? The reason that it should have never been imposed or implemented to begin with is because it violates our right as human beings to vote with our feet. Okay? So there's this old is an older economist, Milton Friedman?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So for the audience, I used to watch Milton Friedman's videos, religiously, hey. I used to really, and I still do watch him once in a while. He's a brilliant man, brilliant economist. And sometimes people think just because he's mainstream that his views are, what's the word? Maybe more dogmatic. But I think that's nonsense. He has his PhD. He's one of the most influential economists when it comes to macroeconomic theory of the past 100, 200 years. At any rate, I used to watch his videos all the time. And once I heard him speak, or he was talking, and I heard him say, people vote with their feet. And I believe he was talking about Hong Kong back in the 80s, but it might have been some other nation too. Perhaps it was Venezuela or Chile or something, what might have you. His point was people vote with their feet. And, the idea was you never see an American, and you still don't see Americans, swimming over to escape into Cuba, right? Or you never saw an individual from East Berlin try and flood the wall, get over the wall to go to West Berlin. Or is it vice versa? Sorry, which one was Russia's?
East was the communist one.
East was?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, sorry. So it's the opposite. Sorry. So you never saw an individual from West Berlin. That makes more sense. Flee over the gate to get into East Berlin. Right. It was always the opposite. Right. You never saw one man who was living in West Berlin, or one woman, or one child, or one family living in West Berlin try their hardest to evade the officers at the Berlin Wall and escape into East Berlin. Nobody did that. Right. That just wasn't a thing, because people vote with their feet, and they display their decisions and their choices by their feet, where they're going, right? So same thing even with Mexico. You have immigrants trying to escape into America, right? The vice versa isn't true, right? Not for the whole of it, right? It's people vote with their feet, and it's an excellent proof about how individuals think about policies and governments and nations. Now, does this make sense so far?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So what we're saying about ArriveCAN is that it violated that right. It violated that right to vote with your feet, right? The reason I say so is because, first of all, it didn't let those who were unvaccinated, and this is not a commentary against vaccinated individuals. It's merely a commentary on the state of Canada and travel in Canada, which was, if you were unvaccinated, you were not allowed to leave the country, right?
Yeah.
Right. So ArriveCAN really is the wrong name for it, right? You should have called it ArriveCAN't, because it didn't make it easier, right? It didn't to travel. It didn't encourage travel. All it did was discourage it, and it made it scarier to return to the nation, right? So again, okay. So back to people vote with their feet, right? I believe that with all my soul, right? But you're only allowed to vote with your feet, right? You can only show your displeasure at your government by moving to a different nation with a different government if you're allowed to move, right? You're only able to do so if you're allowed to move. And you can think of that, think of a dog, for example, right? Suppose a dog lives in a house, and he's not very happy with the house because he thinks it needs to be larger or something. That dog does not have the freedom to leave the house and go to someone else's house, right? He can do so, but the owners look for him. If they find him, they pick him up, even if he doesn't want to be picked up, and he goes back to the house, right? And that's because the dog is property. But that's a point we'll talk about later. Free individuals are free to vote with their feet, right? They're free to voice their displeasure at their government or at their government's rule by moving to a different nation or by moving to a different area, right? If I lived in Calgary and I wanted to voice or show my displeasure for the way that it's being run at present, then I could move to Edmonton, or I could move to Red Deer, or I could move to High Creek, or High River, excuse me, or I could move to Pincher Creek, or to Lloydminster. I could go, or to Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, whatever. I could move, right? Because I have that freedom of travel, right? I have that freedom, that ability to vote with my feet. Now, again, ArriveCAN suspended that. At its heart, that's my issue, and what I believe to be the APP's issue with ArriveCAN. And there are many issues, but it's the fact that it suspended our ability as free individuals to vote with our feet. Because you can only vote with your feet if you're freely allowed to move, right? You're free to stay only if you're free to leave, right? You're free only if you're free to fly, right? Now, does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess one thing real quick that I might touch on,
go ahead.
if that's okay, is that, I mean, playing devil's advocate a little bit here, people often, I know, may say, look, travel is not necessary, and you talked about voting with your feet and that kind of thing, but the argument typically can be, if you don't like how things are run, vote at the ballot every 4 years, right? When we go to mark our ballot, why can't you just do that freedom? And that's not being taken away yet. So what's the kind of response to that, I guess?
Right. It's an excellent question, and my opinion is it's the right to vote with your feet is actually more important, or perhaps more important is the wrong word. It's more fundamental than the right to vote with the pen, to vote at the ballot box. The reason I say so is because if a man is free to vote with his pen at the ballot box, but not free to vote with his feet, then his vote with the pen at the ballot box won't matter very long. Because who cares? Like, from a government's perspective, if the citizen can't leave, who cares if the elections are legit?
Yeah.
Like, of course, there's a moral argument, of course, and maybe the government is moral, maybe the individuals in government are moral and want to keep elections free, but based on a study of history and the present day, things don't exactly work like that. And so if you're not free to leave, what's the incentive for government to rule justly and to keep elections legit, right? If you're free to vote with your feet, fundamentally, if you're free to leave, then you will find that your vote with the pen at the ballot box matters forever, right? Versus not mattering very long. Because if the government doesn't do its job, if it's a poor government, then people will leave, right? We're seeing this with California. How many individuals are fleeing into Florida, right? Or Texas from the states that they believe are not doing a good job of governing, right? It's a proof. It's there's a joke, right? Like, it's people have become this state and that state's number one export, right? Because they move to different states because they don't like the way that their current state is being run. And so it's a proof. So voting with the feet is more important. That might be the wrong term. It's certainly more fundamental than voting with the pen. Because if you're only able to vote with your pen and not with your feet, then your vote with the pen won't matter very long. But if you're able to vote with your feet, then the vote with the pen will matter forever, or for a much longer span of time, really until you're not able to vote with your feet. Now, so the app was not good, right? The app should never have been implemented or imposed into the country. One, because it doesn't allow us to vote with our feet, right? It suspended that ability, and so it didn't treat us as individuals with inalienable rights and freedoms that are given to us by God, right? Some had them as a consequence of obeying a subjective order from government, and others didn't because they refused to obey that subjective order from government. This isn't really a moral thing. That's just stating fact. But there's another issue with ArriveCAN, right? And it's that, and this is this one's really wild, is that it treated individuals as property. That to me is most egregious, right? That is not conscionable, right? It's not stomachable. That is wicked, and here's why, right? Because the individual, the individual is not the right word. The thing that's not free to vote with its feet, or the individual, maybe it is the right word now, who's not free to vote with his or her feet, is property, because they're not free to do what they want, right? I use the example of a canvas. As you know, I'm not a good artist. And I can say definitively that you are not a good artist. Is that correct?
No, that's not quite correct. You ask people that I've drawn a birthday card for, and I think that they will, quite contrarily, tell you that I am a very nice artiste.
Well, I'm pretty sure that you get a better mark in advanced topics in calculus or linear algebra than you would in elementary art. And I mean that honestly. And
I don't know.
too.
I got 51 in grade 9 art. I think that's because she never wanted to see me again.
I don't think I got much higher. I got 52.
I think it was a forced pass, but that's okay. I still passed. I still passed the same as every other kid. So
I am a terrible artist.
Yeah.
I've always been. I wish I was a good artist. I love abstract art. I think that's just stunning. But alas, I have no skill with paint. I have no skill with the pencil. I have no skill with the palette.
Yes.
Right? I wish I did, but I don't. Anyways, suppose you have a canvas, and I decide to get creative one day. I decide that I'm going to paint, right? In an act of spontaneous. What's a fun word? The act of spontaneous creation. I say I'm going to paint, and I've decided I'm going to paint the spirit of our cat, or my cat, or your cat, Mr. Orange, right? I think I've shown it on my page once, Mr. Orange, the Manx cat with no tail. And it's actually Mrs. Orange, but we didn't know that when it first wandered, and so we called it Mr. Orange, and now the name is stuck. But at any rate, I've decided to paint the spirit of Mr. Orange, and so I bring out all these beautiful colors, right? I do take orange. I take a caramel brown, maybe a ferocious black because it has some spice, and a very silky silver, right? And I have all of these colors on my palette, and I'm so excited to paint, and I begin to do so. Now, as it turns out, I'm a terrible painter, as I've mentioned to you. The canvas, although it knows what good art is, can't run away. The canvas has no right to stop my painting. Right? It has no ability to do so. It has no right to do so because I purchased that canvas. I own it, right? Or I bought it. That canvas is my property. And so I can do what I want with my property because it's mine. And so if I want to paint the worst picture ever known to mankind on that canvas, what's the canvas going to do? And it might struggle. It might not like it. Right? It might be like, this isn't art. This is garbage. But it's my property. I own it.
Yeah.
And so it has no right to flee, right? Now, to some extent, but not quite, right? Like a child's the same, right? Of course, the child's an individual, a human being, and so that the comparison's different. But the child is property of the parent, right? The child is the parent's responsibility, right? The two parents created the child. It's theirs, or he's theirs, she's theirs, etc. And the parent has a responsibility to take care of the child. And so the child is property of the parents. Right? And so when the child says, when he's 5 years old, I want to go out at 11:30 at night walking the streets, the parent says no. And there is no issue with that. Right? The child is the property of the parents, even though he's an individual human with rights and freedoms. But because, again, he's a child, he doesn't get a say about the vote with his feet. He might try to vote with his feet and open the door and walk out at 11:30, but the parents won't let him. And no one gets upset about that, or they shouldn't, even though society's becoming increasingly radical, right? Because it's clear that the child is property of the parent. And so he or she, that child, has no right to vote with their feet. In some capacity, maybe, but only when the parent allows it. On the whole, they don't have the right. They have to buckle up in their car seat. They have to go to school at this time. The parent takes them to this and to that, and they don't really get a say in it. All of these things, right? Perfect. And so, in some capacity, I don't want to say their rights and freedoms are suspended, because they're not. Right? It's the fact that they are limited that they actually are able to enjoy their rights and freedoms. If they were unlimited, then they'd be out in the streets at 11:30 and they wouldn't last long, right? Like, they'd be dead. But you don't treat them like other individuals because they're not adults, right? So what I mean to say is when you have property, they don't have rights and freedoms. They're not able to vote with their feet, right? That's a proof that they don't have the rights and freedoms. And that's happened, in history too, and it's it's an awful, wicked, evil thing, right? When another individual is owned. That is utter, of course, there's nothing more evil than that. But it's happened. We've seen it, right? This is why we despise this app so much, because it treats an individual like property, because it doesn't allow him or her to vote with their feet. It doesn't allow them to go where they want to go. You can't fly out of the country. You can't fly to this location. You can't fly to the Bahamas. You can't travel to, I don't know, some state, right? Because you didn't obey the subjective dictums of the federal government, right? So that's the issue with ArriveCAN, right? That's the problem, right? That's the problem. And you can look at any nation you want, right? Yeah. You can look at any history and see which nations restricted their people from moving, like you see which nations emancipated the people's right to vote with their feet. See how it was to live there, right? You can see what the quality of life was there. It's zero, and it's still zero, right? Those nations that don't let their citizens leave are not utopias. Right? Yeah. They are not desirable places to live. There's a reason that they have a restriction on on people leaving, because if they didn't, everyone would leave. Right? They'd all flee, or the vast majority of them would flee. So that's our commentary on that. In this, then, ArriveCAN's just been made optional. Right? It hasn't been totally destroyed. And so that's an issue, because the principle is wrong, right? We don't like ArriveCAN. We think ArriveCAN is wrong. But to say it's optional, you can do what you want, that's not right either. Right? On the one hand, we're glad it's optional. On the other hand, we're really not. It has to be more than that, because something which is wrong, something which is inherently wrong, can't be made optional because it's inherently wrong, right? For a government to allow something which is inherently wrong to continue to exist is wrong, right? And so they have to, in our opinion, they have to completely dismantle it and ensure that it can never, ever, ever be imposed ever again, right? Because it's a bad app, it's a bad principle, and it leads to bad things. And so that was, I know that was a bit more of a rant than usual, but that's my take on the matter. You have anything to add?
Yeah. No, that's about it. But the one quick story, I was just looking on Twitter, like I said before, a little bit about this, and just wanted to mention on behalf of the APP, obviously thinking about all those in the East Coast here and also in America with the hurricanes going on. It was a big hot topic because there were first responders from Maine and Vermont trying to cross, coming in to help Nova Scotia and that with all the flooding that they're seeing in Newfoundland. And they basically said, sorry, you don't have the ArriveCAN app downloaded, turn back around. And so that was obviously a hot topic. So hopefully now that this is optional, like you said, we don't think that it goes far enough, but hopefully that will not continue to be the case. And obviously, hopefully the flooding stops very, very soon for you folks out there. But with that said, thanks again to all of our listeners. Like Tanner said, we have listeners from all across the world, and that's so cool to see. We really appreciate that. But with that said, thanks again for talking with me, Tanner, and we will talk to you later, I'm sure.
Perfect. Thanks a bunch.
All right, see ya.